Hey everybody, my name's Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com and co-host of the Man Shout Show with me, Boy Green, on the Score 1260. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and for those who will be listening on the radio on actual draft day on Thursday morning, hello to the Salt City as well. And this will be our final draft conversation, our final in-depth draft chat. Whether on the radio or video, before the NFL draft kicks off on Thursday night at 8 o'clock. And I'm pleased to welcome not only a fellow NFL draft enthusiast, but also a good friend that I've made this offseason. That's Russell Brown, national scout for Cover1.net, host of the Cover One NFL Draft podcast. And we got a lot of cool segments. It's going to be a unique interview. If you've been a part of my YouTube channel or you've heard me on the radio, this is going to be different than any other interview I've done before. We prepared a lot of, and if you're a fan of the radio show, of course, a little bit of trending around the water cooler, shooting blanks, kind of mix up of draft segments and fun Q&A. And we'll be doing that again with Russell Brown, who's our guest for this. Russell, thanks for taking the time, man.
Yeah, Paul, appreciate you, man. It's been a lot of fun getting to know you throughout the draft process so far this offseason, and just whether it's talking general draft stuff, the Jets, and everything in between. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to do this with you, and I hope we can do it a lot throughout the offseason, during the season, and moving forward. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And this will have, for all the people who are listening, I know on the radio, on the YouTube channel, there's just diehard Jet fans. That's the reason they come here. But for the radio show, we'll have a nice blend of both generic NFL draft topics as well, getting everybody ready for draft day for all the fans that listen to our radio show, the Man Shout Show with me, Boy Green, and of course a little flavor for all the Jets people out there. So let's start with some generic NFL draft questions. One of the top one is Teddy Bridgewater was traded here on Wednesday from the Carolina Panthers to the Denver Broncos for a 6th-round draft choice. And I ask you, Russell, does that take the Panthers or the Broncos out of the quarterback market in the first round in this NFL draft?
I don't know if it takes either team away from it, to be completely honest, because both teams have done so much homework in trying to find a quarterback in this draft. And the Broncos have done some extensively on players like Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and Mac Jones, especially Mac Jones and Justin Fields. But the Panthers, they love Justin Fields from everything that I've come across. And on the same token, they're in a great spot where he could fall right into their lap. So I find it very interesting that the day before the draft, they moved Teddy Bridgewater, which is probably the only quarterback equivalent on the roster to probably compete with Sam Darnold. And now they've got an opening, I think, whether it's for a backup or a starting spot. And I don't know if they're going to necessarily take a quarterback, but I think that they are in a position to make that 8th overall pick, and I'm talking for the Panthers, of course, that if they want to make that pick open, they have now done so, because they have kind of tipped their hand in saying, hey, we might take a quarterback. And if you're a team like, and for the Jets' purpose, a division rival like the Patriots, who have sniffed around the top 10 quite a bit for a quarterback, hey, if you're interested, we'll take that jump back to 15, and you guys can get up and get Justin Fields if you want him, if he falls to that spot. So I think it's very interesting. I am kind of beating around the bush in a sense of which team will take a quarterback, but if I had to choose, I mean, I would just kind of have to go with the obvious of it being Carolina, for the simple fact that, I mean, Sam Darnold, yeah, they spent 3 draft picks for him, but ultimately it's the only quarterback they really have that can compete on the roster. So they've got to find a backup, but I don't know if it makes sense for them, because they could be looking to win now, and they are in a position to get some very good players in this draft that aren't a quarterback, that might, some people might view as resetting the franchise. So I'll go with the Panthers being the team that might be most likely to draft a quarterback.
I got to imagine Teddy Bridgewater hates Sam Darnold. For those who don't know, Teddy Bridgewater, so the horrific injury happens at Minnesota. He eventually reaches free agency. He fights back. The Jets give him a chance. He's like, hey, baby, here's my chance. The Jets don't got nothing here. This is great. I'm going to be their franchise quarterback. And then a couple, weeks later, they draft Sam Darnold. He's like, okay, that seems a little weird, but all right, let's just figure this thing out. And then he looks great. He being Teddy Bridgewater in training camp and preseason. They're like, okay, we'll trade him to New Orleans. Teddy Bridgewater's like, great, I'm the future in New Orleans. This is phenomenal. And then he ends up signing a record-breaking deal in Carolina. Looks great. Looks like he's going to get a bunch of money. Sam Darnold once again gets traded. He's like, are you kidding me? I need like a restraining order against Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
And Teddy Bridgewater. Now, once again, he's like, son of a gun. Here I am once again in Denver. So I imagine, again, this is pure speculation, that Teddy Bridgewater just must hate Sam Darnold's guts right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it seems like. I mean, just a odd turn of events for one player, and really, I guess, for another player, because let's be honest, Sam Darnold, I don't think was ever expecting to go to the Jets when he was getting drafted. I think he was expecting Cleveland at number 1 overall. And then I'm sure he was never expecting at this point in his career, before age 24 or at age 24, to be dealt to a team like the Carolina Panthers. So it's just an odd league that we play in and that we see every single week. So, I'm rooting for both quarterbacks. Let's be honest. Teddy Bridgewater, there's a lot to like with him, and I'm rooting for Sam Darnold because there's just so much to work with. And I know I said the Panthers taking a quarterback it might make sense, but at the same time, it makes sense to build around Sam Darnold.
All right, let's just jump into some other stuff here. First off, I want some surprise names from you that haven't been popularly mocked in first rounds, that we could see their names called, or we could hear their names called on draft night first round. Who are some names, again, that you just look at and you see all these names in the first round, and then you're like, this guy. Who's the guy we're going to hear and go, who? What? What's going to give us that reaction?
I'll throw a couple of names here. I'll start with one, and you might have heard of him probably by now. Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss, the wide receiver. He had over 80 receptions this past year. He was on pace for 10 receptions per game. He's great slot receiver. He's got experience playing on the outside. He's a very efficient mover in the open field, and he's got a fluid lower body. So Elijah Moore. A lot of people are uncertain on Rashad Bateman. What is Rashad Bateman with the COVID situation? He was battling all season through it. He lost close to 20 pounds. I don't know if people are aware of that issue. And at the same time, I think people are like, hey, I don't know if this guy is going to go in the first round, at least not as early as being the 4th receiver off the board, because everybody's expecting, a combination of Chase, Smith, and Waddle. So with that, I think Elijah Moore could be the 4th receiver off the board. But outside of that, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw somebody like Dyami Brown out of North Carolina, maybe a little bit of a safer pick. More so, you would say, hey, this guy's an early day 2 pick. But when you look at teams like the Ravens, the Packers, maybe even the Bills, or even a team like the Buccaneers, some of those teams have the luxury of taking a receiver in the back end. And if they feel like they need a complement to their true number 1, especially a team like the Saints or the Packers, Dyami Brown might be that complement. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in regards to that. So he could be another receiver off the board, especially because I mentioned Elijah Moore and I mentioned Rashad Bateman as some of the pros and cons there with both those guys. Well, another one, Terrace Marshall, might not necessarily go in the first round. He was a common name to the Ravens at 27. He might not necessarily be on the border for any team because of medical issues. So there's some concerns with a broken leg that he had back in high school. It affected his knee, and the medical rechecks showed that. So I think there's some concerns there with Terrace Marshall. The next name I'll throw out there is Liam Eichenberg out of Notre Dame. We hear a lot of the tackles going in this first round. You're talking Rashawn Slater, who I have as a guard, but teams like him as a tackle. Penei Sewell, of course. You got Christian Darrisaw. I think there's the competition for that 4th or 5th tackle off the board, and there's an expectation of offensive tackles going between picks 20 all the way through 32. And we could potentially see 3 offensive tackles through that point. So Liam Eichenberg, maybe a team like the Colts, who were at his pro day, they apparently really like him. He competed at the Senior Bowl, so he's a Senior Bowl type of guy for them. So I think the Colts could be a team that maybe looks to trade back, and maybe they look at Liam Eichenberg. Outside of that, I'll throw it to, Alex Leatherwood, Alabama. I said offensive tackles, and then defensively, edge rusher Joe Tryon from Washington. This guy's got just some really impressive tape. He's very fluid. I think he would be a player that would be very coveted in a system like Tampa Bay, with that defense and some of the playmakers that they have, but also now the Ravens having 2 first-rounders. They lost Matt Judon. They're going to look to replace that edge rusher position, and Joe Tryon could be that guy. So that's just a couple of names thrown out there.
Tasty. That's what that sounds like. A lot of interesting names there. Again, we're speaking of Russell Brown, national scout for Cover1.net and host of the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. So let's get into some new segments here. We're going to play a little buy or sell. I'm going to feed you some of the NFL draft buzz, some of the rumors I've been hearing over the last week. Throw it over to you. You're either going to buy it or you're going to sell it. First off, let's go with this. This is an interesting one. When asked if he could guarantee that Jimmy Garoppolo would be on the 49ers roster Sunday, Kyle Shanahan said, quote, "I can't guarantee that anybody in the world will be alive Sunday," end quote. So, Russell, let's start off there. Buy or sell either one of us being alive on Sunday to recap this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I'll buy that. I mean, anything could obviously happen, but it's very morbid way to put it. And I mean, I just think it's more so Kyle Shanahan's probably a little annoyed with the media. He's annoyed with all the Mac Jones stuff. And I mean, I can't blame him. I think he views Mac Jones as the quarterback that he wants. I think he's going to be the 3rd overall pick. And with that, I think he understands the wave that is coming. He understands that he's going to pass on Trey Lance and Justin Fields to take Mac Jones. And he knows he's going to have to answer that on Friday morning. And I think it's just, maybe, I don't want to say regret, but he just knows that he's going to have to come up with some answers. And it was a very morbid way to put an answer to a question. And we've heard some wild stuff in the media, but we'll see how that fit goes. I think it's a good fit overall. And ultimately we'll see what happens with Jimmy Garoppolo. Does he end up with a team like New England? Does he end up with a team like Carolina? They move one quarterback. Do they maybe make an offer to get a guy like Jimmy G? I don't know. We'll see what happens there. So I think there's going to be a market though, a little bit for Jimmy Garoppolo.
I'm going to be honest. I've heard a lot of quotes from press conferences, but that's got to be up there as one of the wildest things I've ever heard. So thank you, Kyle, for keeping things interesting here during draft season. One more quickie on Shanahan. Earlier this week, he said he traded up to number 3, knowing he was comfortable with 5 players at the quarterback spot. Buy or sell?
Man, I'm going to say sell. I think maybe originally at 12, that would make sense. But at 3, I think your board's pretty narrowed down. And I mean, obviously there's 5 quarterbacks there. So really he's talking about the 5 first rounders. I don't think that means he's sprinkling in Kellen Mond or Kyle Trask or even Davis Mills, but I think he's just more so beating around the bush. He doesn't want to hint at, I really like Mac Jones over any of these quarterbacks, or I really like Trey Lance over any of these quarterbacks. So it's more so just playing it safe, playing on the fence. And it's a very unique way of putting it. But that's just the way some coaches are. And I think with Shanahan, I think he's starting to feel the pressure, and I think as he should. But I also think, John Lynch reiterated, we're going to go with what Shanahan wants. And I think that was really the proof in the pudding right there. He wants Mac Jones. We're going Mac Jones. So I think though the pressure is on, hey, you got to make it work. We're passing on Justin Fields, Trey Lance, etc. You're going to have to make it work with Mac Jones, who might just be Kirk Cousins 2.0. We'll see.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's go. A little couple quickies here on buy or sell. The Saints are, quote, a team to watch to trade up in round 1. Buy or sell, Russell?
I'm going to buy that for the simple fact that going into this draft, they didn't have a ton of draft capital. They ended up getting some more because of some compensatory picks, and they do have a ready-made roster when you look at it as a whole. The quarterback situation is the biggest question mark, what's going to happen between Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, but ultimately, that's a pretty good roster. And I think when you look at the possibility of a player like maybe Caleb Farley, who could fall to maybe 20, 21, 22, I think I mentioned it earlier. The Colts could look at moving back in this draft. I think the Titans could look back at, look at moving back. And let's be honest, maybe a team like the Jets from 23, maybe they move back to 28. So I think the Saints are going to try to move up 5, 6, maybe 7 spots. Nothing crazy. I would be really shocked if they moved up from like 28 to, let's say, 15 or 16. I would be completely floored by that. But moving up 5 to 7 spots seems very possible. And if there's a cornerback that they like, I think that they could take them. And they might just reassure themselves that they're getting the top guy on their board. I think those guys could be Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech, Greg Newsome out of Northwestern, and Asante Samuel Jr. out of Florida State. And I guess that would be another game or another guy that we talk about, a name that would be surprising at the back end of the first round. I mean, he hasn't been mocked a ton in the first round, but I think there's a lot of talent there. I think a lot of people see the talent with him. And I think the Saints could be one of those teams that, hey, we could pair him opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. That'd be a great duo for our defense.
All right, last buy or sell here. The Dirty Birds, a.k.a. the Atlanta Falcons, are quote-unquote still open to taking a quarterback with the 4th overall pick. One final, buy or sell?
I'm going to sell. I think I don't want to say it's etched in stone, but I'm fairly confident. If I had to put it on a percentage, I would say probably 90% sure that they're going to end up with taking Kyle Pitts with that 4th overall pick. I'm sure their board is altered in a sense of Kyle Pitts at the very top, sprinkled in with Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, and a quarterback, maybe Justin Fields or Trey Lance. But ultimately, I think they're going to go Kyle Pitts. And I say it for the simple fact, Arthur Smith loves to run with 2 tight end sets. He likes a versatile chess piece. Jonnu Smith was kind of that guy, could play in the slot, maybe not so much be a dominant X receiver, but he could play inline. And when you look with Kyle Pitts, he can do all of those things. And he's just so versatile and so talented. So I think if they move Julio Jones, I'm not saying you're replacing Julio Jones with Kyle Pitts, but you're bringing in another weapon for Matt Ryan, and they're going to try to capitalize on that window. And I will just say this kind of on a side note with Julio Jones. I would be a little surprised if they traded him just simply for the fact that he's just such a long-term franchise tenured player. But at the same time, it makes sense. And I speak from experience. The Detroit Lions refused to move Calvin Johnson. He retired. Had they have moved him, they would have cleared probably close to the same amount of money that Julio Jones has as far as dead cap money and clearing up cap space. Falcons only have less than $1 million in cap space. So if they move him by June 1st, they have close to, I think, $16 to $17 million at that point. So that would clear up the space to sign some of the rookies that they have here after the draft and any possibilities of signing another free agent as well.
All right, let's do a couple bits of rapid fire here. We're jumping into a little this or that. I'm going to give you a binary proposition, and you pick which side of the club you're bouncing on. First offensive tackle taken, Penei Sewell or Rashawn Slater?
Penei Sewell. I'll go that route. I think he's just the clear-cut best offensive tackle in the class. And like I said, I think Slater's a guard, but ultimately I know teams are going to view him as a tackle. I think he's very comparable to Buffalo Bills left tackle Deion Dawkins. Ultimately, though, Sewell is just that guy that you saw what he did at 18, 19 years of age. He was so dominant, way he moved in space, just the consistency within his game. He was truly a man amongst boys. And it's one of those things where I think he can come in, and teams like Detroit, if they're looking to, if he falls to them, I think you might end up running to the podium because he kind of fits what they're looking for, a guy like biting kneecaps and things like that. So it makes a ton of sense if you go out and get that guy. If Carolina stays at 8, maybe that's the piece that you help build around Sam Darnold, and even Denver at 9. So I think he's got a market really between 7 to 10. And I think he's just going to be the clear-cut favorite to be the top tackle.
First corner taken, J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain?
Man, I'm so torn on this. And I'll say this because, Mike McCarthy was the coach of the Saints, and he coached Joe Horn. He was part of developing Joe Horn and all of that stuff. So not saying he got to know JC Horn, but I mean, he knows Joe Horn pretty well. He's going to get to know JC Horn pretty well. On the contrary, I know that the Cowboys really like Patrick Surtain. They know because of getting to know Nick Saban and how well connected Saban in Alabama is to the Cowboys. So I think it's really 50-50. I'm going to go just with my top corner on the board, and that's Patrick Surtain. And I think he's the best corner in this draft from his length to his natural athletic ability. He's just such a natural strided athlete. He's disruptive through the catch point by utilizing that length. While I love the physicality of J.C. Horn, and he could ultimately be the better corner of the two, I'm going to go with Patrick Surtain.
And the last bit of this or that, first edge rusher taken, there's no binary proposition. I don't know who the two are. So I'm going to leave this a blank because I'm genuinely curious. Who the heck is coming off the board first and among all these edge rushers?
I don't think the NFL knows, to be completely honest, but and I think that's really with all the teams across the league. I think every single board, and that would be the case with probably every year. Every board is different, but it feels like there's always that consensus top player at every position. But edge rusher's a little different this year. Same with defensive tackle. But I'm going to go with Kwity Paye. And I think when you look at the Giants at 11, they've been rumored to liking him quite a bit. The Eagles as well at 12. And I think part of that, they might be just rumored as more so a smokescreen to force the Giants' hand to make sure that maybe Micah Parsons possibly falls to them, or a corner like J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain. So I think Kwity Paye, though, could be the first edge rusher simply for the fact that I don't want to say is the fallback plan for the Giants or the Eagles, but it just might be more so the smokescreen forces one of those two teams to force themselves to taking him.
I found 3 quick over-unders from Vegas, so feel free if anybody finds any of these interesting.
Yeah, I'm a degenerate on that, so let's bet.
Okay, so throw some money on this. These are 3 that stood out to me in a lot of different ways. So Devonta Smith, over-under right now is 11.5 overall. What are you taking?
Devonta Smith?
Yeah.
Man, I will tell you this, man. I did my mock draft last night, and I struggled so hard on where to put him. And I think it's very comparable to CeeDee Lamb last year. I had CeeDee Lamb as my 5th ranked player, my top receiver last year. He went 16th overall. Devonta Smith, he's my 3rd ranked receiver. I could see him going 7th overall. Ultimately, I'll take the over.
Okay. Let's go. One of my favorite players in this draft, Elijah Vera Tucker, the over-under number, the sweet spot, 15.5 overall, over-under.
Wow. I'm going to say under. Oh man, that's brutal because I think he could potentially slide to 16, 17, or 18. There's no way he gets past 18 to the Dolphins. I could see the Cardinals or the Raiders. They both make a lot of sense. The Cardinals could look to just upgrade their offensive line. The Raiders, the moves that they've made. But I'll say under because the Chargers and the Vikings sitting there. If the Patriots sit there at 15, and really, let's be honest, the Eagles at 12, they're a wild card for an offensive lineman. Let's be honest. That offensive line was terrible last year. It was beat up. If Rashawn Slater's there, if Elijah Vera Tucker, who I think is somewhat comparable to Andre Dillard, who they already have. So I'll say under.
All right. And final one here, Micah Parsons, over under 13.5 overall.
Wow. These are some good ones, man. These are tough ones because especially with Parsons, because the character concerns are so real and he's so all over the place because some things have pointed to him falling out of the top 20 and potentially landing with a team like maybe the Titans at 22 or the Jets at 23. But on the same token, I mean, I'm going to say 13.5, you said?
Yes, sir. It's tough.
I'm going to say under. We talked about it earlier. Panthers taking a quarterback, the Broncos passing. I think he ends up at Broncos at 9.
All right, there you go. Which we go to Russell Brown again, national scout for Cover1.net, host of the Cover1 NFL Draft Podcast. This is a brand new segment, and I'm going to be honest. I was scrolling through Twitter yesterday, or a couple days ago, and I just saw how someone phrased something on Twitter, and it just hit me, and I'm like, that's a Shark Tank segment right there. So I got to give a shout out to Krista Levitas on Twitter that is inspiring this segment we're about to do here for the first time ever on the show. So I'm going to give you a player's name in Shark Tank style. You tell me whether you are in or whether you are out on the player and provide a quick rationale on some of these players. And again, I tried to pick some polarizing players, some players that, again, have really caused a lot of draft experts to scratch their head or jump on one side or the other. I'll start off with one of the most polarizing in this entire class, Caleb Farley, cornerback, Virginia Tech. Are you in or are you out?
Wow. Man, this is tough. You got me in a tough segment here. Wow. Excellent. I will say this disclaimer, like the player a lot. So that kind of already gives the answer away. I like the player a lot. If I was getting them at a specific spot in the draft, depending on that spot, I would be in. What is that spot, real quick? I think if you're getting them in the late 1st, early 2nd round, I think I would be in. And I think ultimately, and we see this a lot every single year. You look back, Cody Ford, he fell into the second round. It felt like that guy was a top 25 player, fell into the second round. There was lower body concerns there. You look at Byron Murphy when he came out, he was the first pick in the year that Kyler Murray was drafted. He ended up going the first pick in the second round. Everybody thought he was a top 25 player, a first round lock. So every single year, T. Higgins, another example, fell the Bengals last year. We see it every single year. Players fall. Caleb Farley, bad circumstances. I think he falls. I don't think we hear his name tomorrow or, essentially Thursday night. So ultimately, I'm going to say I'm out because just talking first round and specifically for a team like the Jets at 23, I think I'm out for the fact of there's some other corners like that I like from Asante Samuel Jr. that I think might be a little bit safer, might even have equivalent upside. Greg Newsome as well, who I don't like a ton because he's not as physical as some of these guys. He kind of shies away from contact. He's a decent tackler when he does it right, but he shies away from contact. But Caleb Farley, the back injuries and just everything coming up now. You got the COVID stuff. I mentioned Rashad Bateman, the COVID concerns during the year. Could that potentially wrap in here? I mean, teams might say, hey, I can't draft this guy. What if he loses 20 pounds? I mean, he's only 190 pounds right now. I can't have a 170-pound corner when I take him in the first round. So you got the back injuries and the possibility of another back surgery. So there's just way too many concerns. So I'm out on Caleb Farley.
The one
That was
nugget
fun.
I'll say,
That was fun.
no, yeah, and the one nugget I'll say here is you should never be influenced by mock drafts. NFL teams say you should never. But I'll tell you this: earlier this week, the ESPN NFL Nation crew did their mock draft, and they do it every year, where each of the ESPN reporters that cover their respective teams play GM, and they make all their picks without any trades or anything. The Carolina Panthers reporter David Newton, with the 8th overall pick, mocked Caleb Farley, and I almost fell out of my seat. And then I just thought to myself, this is a guy that covers this team on a daily basis. This guy obviously is a insider for his team. The fact that he put him there at 8, like as I was preparing my final mock draft, that we did it on the show yesterday on the radio, I said to myself, I got to put Caleb Farley higher. There's no way this guy would just randomly do it. Maybe he just randomly did it for the conversation it started, and good for him. He just made himself a lot of money. But I just feel that just made me go, wait a second here. This could be one of the shocks of the draft, and maybe that's it. So that, to me, again, just raised a red flag. We'll see ultimately here tonight for those listening on the radio, for those tonight, to see if he hears his name called or doesn't. He will, of course, not be in attendance because Caleb Farley got COVID, as we found out this week. So he will not be attending the draft. He will be there virtually, Zoom. For what that's worth. Let's go through a couple more players here in the Shark Tank here. Jalen Phillips, edge Miami. Are you in or are you out?
I'm going to say I'm in. I'm going to go with that. I'm in for the simple fact that there's just so much to work with him. There's definitely times where it feels like he doesn't turn it all the way on, and obviously the medicals are a concern. And I'm normally one of the guys, and we just talked about it, Caleb Farley, the medicals, I'm out. This is one of those cases where, yeah, I could be out. Concussions, especially. I mean, those things could reoccur in practice. It could happen when he's getting off the bus. So there's a lot of concerns there. But I'm going to say I'm in just because there's just so much to work with him. And if I can get him on my team for 6 to 7 years and I get double-digit sack production, I'm not worrying about a back injury. I can deal with that. And I think ultimately I think he's going to go in the first round. It's just a matter of where, and maybe it's the Vikings at 14. Maybe it's the Jets at 23. That, you look at Robert Saleh, he loves bigger edge rushers. You look at DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. I mean, Jalen Phillips is 6'5", 270. So I think it's one of those things that he fits the bill a little bit. And if he's there, he could be that guy. Maybe the Browns trade up for him. So I think he's a very intriguing player that ultimately, yeah, I'm going to be in on.
All right, Jason Oweh, edge, Penn State, in or out?
Yeah, I'm in. Look, the freakish athleticism, I don't normally freak out about that stuff, But when you're 6'5", 250, and you're running a freaking 4.3, 540, and you're testing out of the gym with everything that you're doing, I'm going to trust that my defensive line coach that I'm paying probably close to $1 million to coach my guys can teach you the fundamentals of how to be an efficient pass rusher. So I would definitely take a stab at that guy in the first round, just simply because there's so much to work with. And when you look back at his huddle tape, you watch him play tight end. I mean, the guy's running past safeties, and I mean, it's just he's a freak of nature. And I know there was a lot of times, like, you look at production, Russ, he only had 7 career sacks, and yeah, that's very concerning. But ultimately, there was a lot of close calls where he was pressuring the quarterback. He was where he needed to be. I trust myself as a person to fix that. I can trust my coaches to fix that.
All right, and last one here, and then we'll wrap up the show with the mock, and I'll explain all that in a few minutes. Joe Tryon, edge, Washington, in or out?
Yeah, I'm in. I don't know if I would necessarily, and I mentioned him as a first round potential fit in this draft. And I don't know if I would, if I'm a team like the Ravens, I got 2 first rounders, I would do it. If I'm a team like the Jets, I got 2 first rounders, I'd do it. The Jaguars, same thing. I don't know if I'd necessarily take him early or late first round. Maybe if I knew I wasn't going to get him on my second turn, I think his best value is probably early day 2. But ultimately, yeah, there's a lot to work with him. 6'5", 255, very fluid lower body. I loved watching him go from being in a 3-point stand to standing up. There was definitely times where he was way too narrow with his stance, and it cost him to false step. It cost him to be off balance, but there's a lot to work with him. He's dropping into coverage. So when you have an edge rusher that can go curl to flats, he can run mid-hook zones. When you get that type of production and that type of versatility for your defensive end, I think there's a lot to work with. And meanwhile, on third down, you can pin his ears back and he can rush the passer. I love his skill set. So I know it sounds like I'm talking him into the first round. Yeah, sure, I would take him, but I think he will go in the first round. I do, and maybe he doesn't, but yeah, I'm in on a player like that for sure.
Yeah, I've had a few people. A couple weeks ago on a mock draft Monday, my good buddy Emery Hunt of the Football Game Plan was a Joe Tryon guy. He sang the sweet praises, and of course, I believe it was the Chris Sims mock had the Jets jumping on the Joe Tryon train at 23. So fascinating stuff. Russell, to wrap this up, it's time for mocking the mock. We've never done this before. I did it this week on my audio podcast. Had some contributors and had some listeners say, hey, let me berate Paul with his mock and just rip him to pieces or compliment him. So here it is. Folks, I said this for those who are listening on the radio. I said this earlier this week. I did a 7-round New York Jets mock draft this week that I dropped on heavy.com. And I got a great response. So thank you to everybody who read and everyone who commented on the YouTube channel. I did a video about it. I did the article. And now let's do another one here about it. And Russell, you can take this however you want. You can be serious. You can be funny. You can make fun of it. You can praise it, whatever you want. We want your expert analysis on this 7-round New York Jets mock draft. We'll kind of grade it pick by pick. You can kind of just assess what you make of the player or the pick itself, and then we can kind of move through the whole thing and lay a final grade on it. We'll put a bow on this puppy ahead of the Thursday night's NFL draft. So you have it in front of you. This is the 7-round mock draft. And, of course, we'll start with second overall. No surprise here. The New York Jets go Zach Wilson. Your thoughts on the player?
Yeah, look, I think Zach Wilson's a great fit for an offense that I think needs to be revitalized. They need to be brought back to life. They need that kind of backyard style of play that he provides, and he can do so much off structure, off script, and it's been no secret that they've been kind of linked to him. So it's not surprising to see this be the pick. I would understand if you went in a different direction, maybe you as a fan wanting to go Justin Fields or Trey Lance or something, or even Mac Jones, if that's your cup of tea. But ultimately, I think Zach Wilson just brings so many different options to your offense. He's going to be a focal point, and he's going to bring some juice to this franchise and to the city that I think with Jets fans, I mean, look, I listen to WFAN every single day, listening to the fan and listening to Jets fans just being somewhat miserable on certain, especially during the fall, just wanting to tank for Trevor Lawrence, which I understand, but you never want your franchise to tank. And with that being said, you get Zach Wilson. I think he can provide a buzz, a much needed buzz for your franchise.
All right, let's go to their second first-round pick via Seattle. I'm going to be honest. This is a player that, first off, my dad's a diehard Notre Dame fan, so I've seen like every Notre Dame game that has ever been played in the history of Notre Dame football. So I've seen this player a lot, but I fell in love with him initially, and then I just went through all these other phases of the draft process, and maybe that's just by nature. We just have months to analyze and assess things, so you move on. But I came back to this player as I was getting ready for the 7th round mock draft. It's just a guy I'm in love with. That is, of course, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, JOK. I'm in love with him. And a lot of Jet fans are kind of surprised with this pick. You haven't seen a lot of 23rd overall linebacker choices for the Jets, but he's a player I'm in love with, and I think Robert Saleh would be too. Your thoughts, Russell?
I love the selection. I don't know if he realistically will be there. I will say that firsthand. I think 17, 18, 19. I think the Raiders, Dolphins, and Washington are all doing their research at linebacker. And we could very well see linebacker in, we talk about quarterbacks 1, 2, 3. We could see linebacker 17, 18, 19. So he could be off the board. But if he is on the board, I think it's actually a really good pick, especially if there's any uncertainty when you talk about some of the edge rushers. We talked about Kwity Paye. He should be gone. Jalen Phillips, he could be gone. But if there's any uncertainty with concussions, the medicals, maybe even the commitment to the football field and just to the game itself, he could be gone, or he might just be somebody you want to pass on. So if Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is there, I think he's a splashy pick for your defense. He brings speed. He's versatile. You can play him in the box. He can be that overhang defender. And when you talk about just athletic ability and change of direction, there might not be a better defender in the draft. So I know some people list him as a safety. Some people list him as a linebacker. I got him as a linebacker. He's going to play that box safety role. And I don't want to say that's Fred Warner in San Francisco, because it's not, because he's not a box safety, but he's an athletic player and a move linebacker that can move all over the field for San Francisco. Robert Saleh envisioned that for Fred Warner, took him in the 3rd round. He might go ahead and pull the trigger here at 23 with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So I really like that fit, especially if he ends up being available.
And that's the perfect segue into the next pick here, because I think I've gotten more clap for this next pick than anybody else. Well, what are you, an idiot? Or what, you just start studying the draft yesterday there, Billy Joe? And Creed Humphrey at 34th overall, you think he's going to be there, you nerd? And I'm like, oh, hey, man, I just think that it's possible. I just made a whole case about interior offensive linemen sliding all the time. I'm like, maybe it happens. And they're like, maybe you're a moron. And I'm like, that's very possible. And maybe it's possible that Creed Humphrey is there as well. Am I crazy to think that he could somehow be there for the Jets at 34?
You're not crazy to think that, but I do think he will end up going on Thursday. I'll be honest, unless somehow, some way the Ravens or the Bills or even the Packers decide to take Landon Dickerson instead of Creed Humphrey. But with the medicals with Landon Dickerson, I mean, you're talking about 5 injuries in 4 seasons. So it's one of those things where I think when you look at this, Creed Humphrey, if the Steelers can't get Najee Harris, I think the Steelers at 24 makes a ton of sense. So I don't think he's realistically going to be there. I think there's just way too many teams in front here that makes sense. But if he is there, he makes a ton of sense for the Jets. So I'm not going to fault you for taking him, because, again, interior offensive lineman can slide, but we have seen a center taken, and I do not have the statistic in front of me because I'm a bonehead, but we have seen centers taken, I think, in 5 consecutive first rounds. So, and I want to say 8 out of the last 10 drafts, we've seen a center in the first round. So it's very common. We see Billy Price, Frank Ragnow, Ryan Kelly to the Colts a few years back. So it happens. I think a team's going to end up pulling the trigger, whether it's the Steelers, the Jaguars, maybe even a team like the Ravens.
As a fan of the analytics, those are not the numbers I like to hear, Russell. But thank you very much for providing the truth on those scenarios. Let's continue on day 2 here. The Jets have a pair of 3rd-round picks. And of course, for people listening in, I do have Syracuse bias here, and that's another huge criticism of this mock. How many Syracuse guys you got to put in there? You want to put another one in there, Paul? I'm going to be honest, I did. I won't spoil it as we're kind of going through here. If I had enough picks, I would have put a third Syracuse guy in here. We could talk about him later as one of my favorite players in this class. But in the third round, 66 overall, I went Ifatu Melifonwu, Syracuse corner, super talented, love him. If he's there at 66, I'll run it up to the podium. I think it's very, I will admit, I think it's very questionable. The only reason that I put Ifatu here, because I think, quite frankly, it could be a surprise late first. And I know I'm very alone in that camp. Not enough people are on that bandwagon. But I had someone text me to say, hey, man, if you want Melifonwu, you may be able to get him at 66. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh, that's enough conversation for me to put him on there. So I did. Melifonwu, third round. Syracuse guy. He would be the highest drafted Syracuse player in a long time if this is where he went.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a realistic spot for him, actually. And I don't think he'll go in the first round. And I'll tell you what, if he goes in the first round, you call me Friday, and I'll go ahead and PayPal you your favorite pizza joint, and that's on dinner on me on Friday. I would be a little floored that he went in the first round, but I think there's a shot he goes maybe somewhere in the second round, if maybe a run on corners happen at some point in the back end of the first round. But I think with the receivers, the offensive tackles, even a couple of running backs, and obviously you throw it in other defensive players, I think there's a run that pushes him to this spot, and it makes a lot of sense. And I've actually read and caught up on some information on him of the fact that the league is not as high on him as maybe quote unquote draft Twitter is.
Oh.
And it's one of those things. I think it's more so people are looking at his brother, Obi Melifonwu. When he came to the league, he was highly touted, and it's more of a bad rap type of thing. So obviously a team in the second round might say, screw that. We love this kid. We're taking him. And I see why you love him. But if he's there, yeah, you absolutely take him. And I think realistically, there's a shot he's there. So if he is there, he makes all the sense in the world. And when you look at just long athletic corners with Robert Saleh, he makes a ton of sense.
So you're saying there's a chance. That's all
Best
I
movie in the world.
All right, beautiful. There we go. Let's go to the other third round pick. We'll start progressing here a little more quickly through some of these picks. Third round, 86 overall. I feel like it is desperate that the Jets need to double dip on the offensive line. It could happen 23-34. Could happen in some combination, but I think it has to happen on the interior. I gave the Jets Jackson Carman, a guard out of Clemson. Now, he played tackle at college. I think he could slide into guard, and that's where the Jets need beef. I think they're fine at tackle for now, but I think interior is where they need help. Do you also agree that Jackson Carman can make that transition? What do you think of the player?
Yeah, I love Jackson Carman as a day three, or not a day three pick, but as a third round pick. I think he's a solid selection in that range. He's my, my 69th ranked player. Nice. And, he's 6'5", 335. He's a former 5-star recruit. So he was highly touted. He's got a massive frame. So overall, I love his skill set. And I think he's one of those guys that didn't necessarily progress this past season. He never really took like that step to the next level that a 5-star recruit would make, which makes sense to maybe moving him inside to play guard. But he loves using the snatch trap technique, so his feet could get a little bit faster, he could get a little bit stronger overall. But I really like that player, and I love the fit. So I would love that selection there. That's a great spot.
All right, Dwayne Escridge. He's a guy that, and luckily for me, Syracuse and Western Michigan have had this weird beef, and they've just been playing like every year for the past couple of years here while I've been in Syracuse, which is great. So I got to see Dwayne Escridge, the corner, and then in one of his first transition games to wide receiver was against Syracuse. So I got to see a lot of his tape live, which was a lot of the games live, rather, and it was a lot of fun. I have him here in the fourth round. Again, this is another one where they say, what are you smoking there, pal? There's no way he's available here. But that seems to be the missing je ne sais quoi of this Jets receiving group. And sure, they got Corey Davis, they got Denzel Mims, who are the same type of player, these physical, contested catch kind of guys, but they need speed or a number one wide receiver. I think Dwayne Escridge can bring speed for days. What is the draft stock of one Dwayne Escridge? Does this make sense? Is it too low? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love the fit. I agree with you getting some speed there, but I think ultimately he's gonna be gone. A lot of signs are pointing to him being off the board, and he could be somebody that rises up into that early second round, mid second round range. It's pretty rich, but a lot of signs have pointed to that just because he's had an impressive offseason. And when you have a player like Tutu Atwell out of Louisville checking in at like 159 pounds, that's very concerning. And he's moving down draft boards where you've got Dwayne Escridge, who I don't want to say is similar as a player, but he's a very comparable player in a sense of play styles. And you can bring in Escridge and you've got no weight concerns. You don't have a ton of size issues. You know what you're getting. So I think teams that are pass heavy and they're looking for that potential number 2 receiver or just a solid number 3, I think he could go somewhere in that second to third round range. So I think he'll be off the board at that point, but there's going to be some speedsters there where they could look at getting them. So I love that opportunity to get a receiver, and they might even do it sooner, to be completely honest.
All right, let's go to a pair of fifth-round picks that the Jets have. Thank you for the Giants and the Leonard Williams trade for that one. We just got a lot of these picks from other teams, so appreciate it. Patrick Johnson, edge from Tulane, a guy that I think is just going to bring a nice I compared him to Jordan Jenkins just from a guy that may not be this crazy double-digit sack guy at the next level, but a blue-collar guy that'll punch in, punch out. And also throw in the other fifth-round pick, Javian Hawkins, running back out of Louisville. And again, the quick rationale here, and you give your full take on it, is I believe there's a top 3, of course, as everyone does, with Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, and Javonte Williams. But I believe in the rest of the class, and I'll go Liam Neeson here, as I say it in the article, if you're not going to get one of the star guys, you're going to get someone who's got a special set of skills, someone who brings something to the table. And for me, Hawkins brings that unadulterated speed. And okay, if you can't do it all, let me get a guy who could do one thing really well. And I feel like that could be Hawkins. So there you go, a pass rusher and a running back.
Yeah, I love the fit of the pass rusher. It's one of those guys, and both these guys, I didn't study a ton in depth like I did, with my draft guide with 125 players and all that stuff. But I do like both players. I think starting with Johnson, you're getting a player that's going to be more of that depth signing, and he could develop into a productive edge rusher. Maybe he's getting you 4 to 5, 6 sacks a year, but that's okay considering where you're getting him at that draft spot. That's a great landing spot for that type of production. On the contrary with Hawkins, I mean, I love what you just said. You know you're getting a guy with a special set of skills. You kind of know what you're getting, and he's a great fit for a zone scheme. You see Tevin Coleman coming in and what he can do in a zone scheme. I think you're going to see a lot more zone heavy stuff. This makes a lot of sense. So Hawkins could potentially be somebody that comes in and competes and plays in that role. And I don't want to say dominates it, but he could be effective and he could become a third down guy, maybe catching passes out of the backfield. So I really like that fit. And I don't want to say it's, again, not running to the podium type thing, but if you feel like you have a need to get another depth pick or another addition to your backfield, that makes a lot of sense. I like that one a lot.
And to finish off the draft, the Jets do have a pair of 6-rounders. They have their own again. So they have Seattle's pick. Thank you for that. A couple of those. They've got the Giants and the Leonard Williams deal. Thank you for those. And then they also have an extra 6. Carolina, Sam Darnold. Thank you very much. So they have a pair of 6-round picks. First off, again, this is the bias. This is where I got bashed on social is get off your Syracuse bandwagon, dude. You had I fought to earlier. Now you get Trill Williams here in the 6th round. And I think Trill, again, he's a guy that has wild range. I ask one person, they tell me top 100 player. I'm like, oh, great, phenomenal. Ask someone else, 6th, 7th rounder. I'm like, okay, I guess we'll just watch the draft and find out then, I guess. So I have Trill Williams there. I think he's a versatile playmaker, and that's really the word that jumps out to me when I've watched Trill Williams in his career here, playmaker. And then with the other 6, I didn't take a player. I traded it because I feel like that is a Joe Douglas calling card. It's kind of throwing a 6-rounder at the wall, see what happens. Last year I did it with Quincy Wilson with the Colts. That flopped, but he still did it, and he still tried to take a chance. And this one, I have them trading it for David Njoku. Now, I don't know. Maybe the Browns want a little bit more than that. I have no idea. But I just think the ideology for Joe Douglas is grab one of these 6, throw it to a team that's trying to move a player, prior to Joe Douglas, the Jets did it in general, getting Henry Anderson from the Colts when they were switching schemes from a 3-4-4-3, and the Jets were able to get Henry Anderson for nothing, and Goose ended up having a good run with the Jets before flopping and then releasing him this offseason. So, again, the mentality seems to be there to trade late round picks for veterans on teams that they're just going to get rid of anyway at some point. So, a pair of six, Trill Williams, your thoughts, and also, just to throw it in there, because I know you are also an Andre Cisco enthusiast, I will throw that out there as well. And for all the Syracuse listeners here on the radio side of things, feel free to share your thoughts on Andre Cisco. And to all the haters out there, I would have given the Jets Andre Cisco too if I would have had enough picks, but I simply did not. But Andre Cisco thoughts, Trill Williams thoughts, and you can throw the David Njoku thing aside. I just think, again, it doesn't have to specifically be Njoku, but I do believe they will trade it for late round flyers. So let's stick with the Syracuse guys, Trill and Andre Cisco. What do you think of them?
Well, I believe I was probably the guy that came in and said Trill Williams could potentially be a top 100 player, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And I simply say it because you mentioned versatility and playmaker. Well, I think teams are going to covet that. And you see it all the time, every single year. Teams, you say the Jets take a late round, 6th round flyer on a potential veteran that might end up getting cut from another team. Well, teams end up taking a player much sooner than expected because of, hey, it's a flyer. We feel like he's got good versatility. He's a playmaker, etc. Trill Williams kind of fits that. And we saw it a few years ago from a team like the Patriots when they took Duke Dawson. Nobody really thought that guy was going to be a top 100 pick, and he ended up being a top 100 pick. I don't even think he's on the Patriots anymore. So that being said, Trill Williams, I think, is a good physical player. I think there's a lot to work with from height, weight perspective, overall athleticism, and again, the playmaker and the versatility. Now, maybe top 100 might be a little rich. Maybe he's more that 4th, 5th round range, more that value. So the fact that you can get him in the 6th round here, I think is really a great spot, and it's a great fit, and it's an overall, again, great value, because I think he can become and produce into a productive player. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to pound the table for this guy. I'm going to, that I'm going to change my board effectively because I like this player. I like the player a lot. I don't like him as much as the other Syracuse players. And moving on to the other Syracuse player, our boy, Andre Cisco. I think if this guy didn't tear his ACL, we'd be talking about this guy in the 1st round. I truly believe that. I don't care about some of the lower body adjustments that he's got to work with his overall technique. The guy's a playmaker. He can play as a single high. He can float over the top in a dual safety role. He can do whatever you need him to do. And I think he's very comparable to a player like Malik Hooker when he was coming out of Ohio State, similar ball skills, and they ended up both being hurt. They both Malik Hooker went much sooner, and now Cisco's just kind of falling all over the place. But I think a team's going to get a really good, valuable pick. And it sounds like and it looks like there was a video floating around on Twitter that I shared, and I think you did as well. There's a lot with him where he's coming back from his injury, I think, much sooner and much better than anybody expected. So it's one of those things where if you can get this guy, and again, if you can get him in the 3rd round, maybe even in the late 2nd, if you can get that guy, I think you roll the dice with him. If other players can go like a Tease Tabor out of Florida who bombed the combine and everything else, you can take him in the 2nd round, Jelani Tavai, and I'm speaking from pain. Trust me, I'm speaking with tears in my eyes right now. If you can do that, then you can take Andre Cisco somewhere on that 2nd day of the draft, and you can get a quality starter, I think, at the safety position. So I really like some of these Syracuse guys. If I had to rank them, it would probably be Andre Cisco, Ifeito Melifonwu, and then Trill Williams in that order. But ultimately, it's going to be a lot of fun to see where these guys go over the next couple of days, without a question.
No doubt about it. And Andre Cisco, and this perhaps is lofty expectations, but I've said this for a while, ever since he basically stole a starting job and he never gave it back. I close my eyes and I see Ed Reed with the ball hawking ability, ridiculous. Again, and to me, and feel free as a scout, I would love to get your quick nugget here before you sign off, is when, and people interpret this in different ways. When I see a player is always around the ball, I've heard some people say, wow, that's pretty lucky. To me, I would say that's great film study. If he's always around the ball, that must mean he is watching the tape and he always knows in the right place to be. And of course, combining it a little bit with his just incredible instincts. And to me, that is the thing that, again, you just can't coach, you can't teach. Being in the right place at the right time, the rest of the talent will take care of itself. That's the thing I love most about Andre Cisco, quite frankly. And again, I just get visions of Ed Reed and that ball hawking nature of just, and you see all those behind the scenes Peyton Manning versus Ed Reed things where he's reading the quarterback and faking him out and
Yeah.
picking it off, and Peyton Manning's like, damn it, man, how did he do that? I thought he was I thought I had him going this way, and Ed Reed fooled one of the greatest pre-snap quarterbacks of all time. That to me is again what I could foresee, and again a Hall of Famer, one of the best safeties of all time. But just again stylistically with that and Cisco, I just see it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say this. I think Ed Reed might be a little bit too rich for my liking, but that being said, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you can't teach ball skills. You can't teach being at the right place at the right time. That's an instinctive player knowing where he needs to be, and that's a player trusting his athletic ability and his overall talent to be at the right place at the right time, and that's exactly what he does. So I'm very intrigued to see where he ends up, where he lands. I think there's going to be I think there's actually a lot longer of a list teams that need a player like him and that will want him than really meets the eye. So he could go maybe in that, again, second, third round range, maybe be a sleeper. But I think by the time we get into maybe next year or the following year, we could be talking a lot more about Andre Cisco.
Well, Russell, thank you so much for joining us both here on the YouTube channel for people who want to see the visual, which was great, and also for folks who are listening here on draft day and getting that great Syracuse flavor to end the show here, or end this quick interview here before we get to hour number 2. But I got to say, Russell, thank you so much for joining us here. Enjoy the rest of the draft, man. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to working with you. I'm sure this won't be the last time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. It's Christmas Day, so let's get after it. Let's have some fun, and hey, screw it, let's go Jets, man.
There you go. I love it. Thanks, man.